Well, let's get another question here, Jim. This one sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Dan in St. Albans, UK. Hello, fellow Cornette members.
Hello, fellow kids.
Steve Austin has often stated that he was sold a terrible gimmick from Vince as the ringmaster. However, he made the best of what he had, and from a conversation with Vince, was allowed to make comments and jokes in promos, despite the fact that at the time, a lot of the content was edited out due to popping the production truck. My question to Jim, as someone in WWF creative booking at this time, does he have any comments, memories, suggestions, or anything else about what was said in-house in regards to Steve Austin before he became the greatest, most popular WWE wrestler?
Well, the whole ringmaster thing, when they got Austin, Vince, obviously, as we've said before, he's never seen anybody. He goes on recommendations and then he brings the guy in for the meeting and blah, blah, blah. But I'm sure that, Jim Ross, Bruce Pritchard, they've said, well, he's worked with Brian Pillman, who I'm sure Vince said at that point, because Austin came first. As the Hollywood Blondes, he's a good hand. He's trained from Texas, blah, blah, blah. They try to give you a background, but they sell you on the person. We believe this guy's a good talent. He can work. We can do something with him. But then the problem is when they come in for a meeting, Vince will ask them about their personal life and do the get to know you thing. And he tries to be very personable in these meetings. But remember, it's in fucking Mick Foley's book. The first, Michael Foley is his legitimate name, right? So that's what Vince would have seen on the documents. Their first meeting, Vince did nothing but call him Mike. Mike. Well, let me tell you, Mike, so what the impression that Vince gets from you from the initial meeting or meetings, unless you are already clearly established, and the few times that they take somebody fully formed and don't fuck them up and change their name, change their gimmick, change whatever, comes from Vince. And at the time, Steve he's a hoot in person. Steve Austin is a personable guy. But I'm sure in a situation like that where he's meeting with Vince, he's not real comfortable. Steve Austin is also not a guy of a million words unless he can come in and just be in a social situation and be himself. He wasn't going to go in there and go, not to toot my own horn, Vince, but toot, toot, and all that stuff. So I'm sure he probably came off as a dry, kind of matter-of-fact guy. And because he wasn't noted for his over-the-top ability to cut promos as of yet, everybody sold him to Vince as, well, he's a hell of a hand. He's a great worker. He's a great talent. So Vince thinks, well, if he's that great, we'll make him the ringmaster because he's the best wrestler. It's one of those things that in Vince's mind, it's fully formed. But you're like, what the fuck? What are you going to do with that? The ringmaster. Because Vince knew that the play that on words that he was trying to make was, this guy's a great wrestler. But when you hear the ringmaster, you think of a guy in fucking leotards with the fucking whip and the top hat at the circus, right? So and then I also don't think that Vince had confidence in Steve as a promo because he gave him to DiBiase as a manager. And, Ted tried to do a good job there, but that's when Teddy was transitioning to be a manager, and he was good at getting his style of shit and himself over, but there was not a lot of what would become Steve Austin's personality in that presentation. I think we can all agree. So it was an example of having a great guy, but I'm going to go off on a tangent here. Somebody recently in an email said they like the tangents. I know Vince is a busy man and he always has been. He's run a big company, blah, blah, blah. But he's got a lot of people working for him. Every company I ever ran it was me, myself, and I, and the entire booking department, or no matter how busy I was or whatever, I never brought a guy into Smoky Mountain Wrestling unless I'd seen him work and had an idea how to use that individual person. I never booked a guy in OVW unless I had already seen him work on at least our practice shows at church gyms or in training or in some fashion where I had an idea for that specific person and how to present them. Vince would sign guys and then start from scratch, which is just, it's insane to me. So anyway, when DiBiase finally, left and went to WCW for one of the big contracts they were handing out, and then Austin was floating around, so they started letting, what he's referring to in that story was they started letting him do some of his own promos, but it wasn't like he was getting live interviews on Raw, as you'll recall, immediately. But he was doing they did pre-tapes for everything in those days. Locker room pre-tapes and pre-tapes for syndicated television and pre-tapes for local promos. Whatever it was he was doing, people started going back and saying, hey, this fucking guy can talk. Well, then I believe his story, Vince wouldn't want him to be funny because he was probably just saying, fuck it, I'm going to do whatever I can do to get somebody to notice something. But then finally, when they got their heads out of their ass as to what they had, and we were allowed to go with Austin instead of Triple H because he was being punished for being involved in the curtain call. So Austin gets to win King of the Ring. I'll be honest with you, here's a mistake that I made. I didn't want Jake Roberts to be in the finals against Steve Austin, and I can't even remember now who I wanted it to be. But I was like, fuck, I wanted Austin to be able to have a really good match to win the thing and get over, right? And I thought Jake is fucking overweight and undermotivated these days because we've told the stories about, even when Jake, that was the period of time he was on the creative team and still had not given up some of his other pursuits. That's the match. I thought the match would be the shits, but it gave, in hindsight, Austin a chance to do the Austin 316 line, which wouldn't have worked after the finals for anybody else. So I slapped myself in the face. But that's what it was. I've said it before a whole lot quicker than I just did when I said they just finally gave up and threw their hands in the air and let Steve Austin just be himself and talk for himself. And then that's when he ended up being the biggest star in the history of wrestling.
What do you think would have happened if Triple H hadn't been punished and he won that King of the Ring? What do you think the trajectory would have been for Steve Austin? Does he still work with Bret Hart? How would things have transpired with Triple H being the King of the Ring? Any thoughts on where things would have gone?
Well, I mean, you can always do what if, and you can never be right. Bret Hart would have wanted to work with Steve Austin, regardless. Because, remember Bret Hart, he was always anxious to work with guys that he felt deserved a shot. Remember, he had a main event match with Hakushi, for God's sake. Probably the only match that anybody can remember of Hakushi having, unless you're a really deep-cut WWF fan.
That was in your house. That was a great match.
Yeah, and he did with Pierre, remember? He always wanted to work with guys that he thought were being underutilized, that he could elevate or whatever. So, yeah, Bret would have wanted to. As long as Steve Austin was in the locker room, guys would have wanted to work with him. And being at Bret's stature, that probably would have helped Austin some, but it would have hampered his rise if he hadn't won the King of the Ring, because he was starting to fucking get a little rumble anyway, and then boom, here this guy is, and that really kicked him off. It would have hampered him that he didn't get that opportunity. And the guys in the locker room would have been more anxious to work with him than maybe the ultimate booking. The buck stops here on the main booking head, Vince McMahon, wanting to push him. That'd be the thing. We could all say he's great, but the only reason he kind of got that spot is because of plans changing and him just being in the right place and talent kind of being down overall in that tournament for various reasons. And boom, and then the people started bringing the signs, and they loved the Austin 316 and the promo he cut on Jake. And it was, you can't you can't schedule that kind of momentum. You can't just say, okay, in April, we're going to push this guy and it's going to get over like that. When you do something like that gets over like that on its own, you got to go with it, and you got to go with it then, or elsewise you're fucked, and you can't make it up or manufacture it.
It is one of those crazy what ifs. Imagine if Triple H had been elevated at that point. It wouldn't have. I thought Triple H was being shoved down everyone's throat at that period of time anyway.
Yeah, and he would be a lot worse off because he wouldn't have had that year to percolate and people get some of the fucking taste that they had out of their mouth, because he was only about, 6 months away from the hog pen match, wasn't he, at that point?
Well, yeah, I mean, the hog pen match happened because of the curtain call.
Well, I thought the hog pen match was right before that. What else did they do? He did some stupid shit.
I thought that was part of his punishment, was he had to go roll around and slop with Henry.
And it may have been. Well, he should have been more sloppy, because apparently he didn't learn his lesson. He went around and apologized to every one of the boys in the locker room, including me, for being a part of that. And I said, just I accepted it and shook his hand. I said, you learned a lesson here. Little did I know, but I see you've learned a lesson here, because 2 of your friends were going somewhere where they're going to make more money than any of you have ever dreamed of, guaranteed, so they could stand the heat. And the other one of your friends that's staying happens to be the champion, so he can stand the heat, so you're the ones getting punished. And that did cost him 6 figures that year in income versus what he would have done versus what he got. But as soon as shit stains got a little fucking pull around there, and as soon as they can start doing what they want, and their revamped clique Degeneration X got over, they actually played the curtain call on Raw. And he said, he even made the statement that he had to apologize to people, but he didn't mean it. So, he didn't mean it. He didn't mean all those apologies he gave. He would just he was told to go around and apologize to everybody, because he should have. He exposed the business in Madison Square Garden in 1996. That's like shitting. And that's all the more why it's so stunning. At the time, I said, that is like shitting on Vince McMahon's dining room table. And now the fucking son-in-law that's sitting at the same dining room table is one that helped shit on it 25 years ago. But anyway, they have no fucking logic. They have no logic. Well, it just goes to show you that the guy that was shitting on Vince's dining room table 25 years ago is now the one that's carving the Christmas turkey.